You call yourself lazy. You've probably called yourself that today. Maybe out loud. Maybe just in your head while staring at the thing you're supposed to be doing. And the word feels true. It feels like the right diagnosis. But it's not. Laziness doesn't exist the way you think it does. It's not a personality trait. It's not who you are. It's what you call the feeling when you can't explain why you won't move. There's a difference between not wanting to do something and not being able to do something. You know the difference. You felt it. Not wanting to do the dishes is one thing. Sitting in front of your laptop for 3 hours, cursor blinking, chest tight, unable to even start, that's something else. That's not laziness. That's fear. But nobody wants to call it fear. Because fear is supposed to have a reason. Fear is supposed to show up when something's dangerous. And nothing about answering an email or finishing a project or making a phone call is dangerous. So you call it laziness instead. You call it procrastination. You call it lack of discipline. Because those feel like things you can fix. Because if it's laziness, then the solution is simple. Just try harder. Just care more. Just be better. But you've been trying that for years. And it hasn't worked. Because the problem was never effort. But here's what's actually happening. Somewhere in your nervous system, there's a signal, a warning, not a conscious one. You don't hear it as words. You just feel the pull to stop, to wait, to do anything else. And the thing you're avoiding, it's not actually the task. It's what the task means. When you can't start something, it's usually because finishing it would force you to find out something about yourself you're not ready to know. Whether you're good enough, whether you belong, whether the version of yourself you've been protecting can survive contact with reality. That's why you can scroll for hours but can't write one paragraph. Scrolling has no stakes. The paragraph has all of them. That's why you can research a project for weeks without ever starting it. Because as long as you're preparing, you haven't failed yet. As long as you're thinking about it, the possibility is still alive. But the moment you start, the moment you actually try, you risk finding out that you can't do it. Or worse, that you can do it, and it still doesn't matter. Freud didn't call this laziness. He called it resistance. The psyche's way of protecting you from something it thinks you can't handle. And resistance doesn't show up because you're weak. It shows up because some part of you believes the risk is real. You avoid the job application because submitting it means you might get rejected. And rejection would confirm what you're afraid is true. You avoid the creative project because finishing it means other people will see it, and being seen means being judged. You avoid the difficult conversation because having it might change the relationship, and change feels like loss, even when the relationship isn't working. You avoid going to the gym because if you start and quit again, it proves you can't follow through. Better not to start. Better to stay in the version of yourself that still could, theoretically, if you wanted to. The avoidance isn't random, it's specific, it's surgical. You can do 100 things that don't matter. You can reorganize your desk. You can watch documentaries about the thing instead of doing the thing. You can plan and research and think about it endlessly. But the one thing that actually matters, that's where you stop. And you know what makes it worse? Calling it laziness. Because laziness implies you just don't care. But you do care. You care so much it's paralyzing you. The person who doesn't care doesn't feel guilty. They don't lie awake at night replaying all the hours they wasted. They're not sitting there at 2 a.m. hating themselves for wasting another day. That's not indifference. That's not apathy. That's someone who wanted to move and couldn't. That's someone at war with themselves. Carl Jung talked about this differently. He said the things we avoid aren't outside us. They're reflections of something unresolved inside us. The task you can't finish? It's asking you to step into a version of yourself you haven't accepted yet. The email you can't send? It requires you to assert a boundary you're not sure you deserve to have. The goal you keep putting off? It would require you to stop being the person you've been and become the person you say you want to be. And that transition between who you are and who you're becoming, that's where the resistance lives. Because every time you move toward that goal, you're also moving away from the identity you've built. The one that's kept you safe, the one that doesn't have to risk anything. You're not avoiding the work. You're avoiding the identity shift the work would require, and your brain is very good at disguising this. It doesn't say, I'm afraid of being seen as mediocre. It says, I'll do it tomorrow. It doesn't say, I'm terrified this won't matter. It says, I'm just not in the mood. It doesn't say, if I try and fail, I'll have to admit I'm not who I thought I was. It says, I just need to get my life together first. But the mood never comes. The right time never arrives. Because the mood was never the problem. The timing was never the problem. This is why you can be productive in some areas and completely stuck in others. The areas where you're stuck, those are the ones tied to something you haven't made peace with yet. The ones that would cost you something emotionally. The ones where success or failure would mean something about you, not just about the task. You can clean your entire apartment to avoid writing, because cleaning doesn't threaten your identity. Writing does. You can spend hours helping other people with their problems to avoid facing your own. Because their problems don't ask anything of you except competence. Your problems ask you to change. You can be incredibly disciplined about things that don't matter, and completely undisciplined about the things that do. And that's not laziness, that's self-protection. And here's the part nobody tells you. Sometimes the avoidance is correct, not because you're lazy, but because the thing you're trying to do isn't actually aligned with who you are. You're forcing yourself toward a goal that someone else valued, a parent's dream, a societal expectation, a version of success you never wanted but learned to want. And your resistance? It's your psyche trying to tell you something. It's saying, this doesn't fit. It's saying, you're trying to become someone you're not, and no amount of discipline will fix that. Because discipline can't make you want something you don't actually want. It can force you to do it, but it can't make it meaningful. Nietzsche said, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. But what if you don't have a why? What if you're just doing things because you think you're supposed to? Because everyone else is doing them? Because not doing them would mean admitting you don't know what you actually want? Then the how becomes unbearable. Not because you're weak, because there's no meaning holding it together. And your nervous system knows this. It knows when you're lying to yourself. It knows when the goal isn't yours. And it resists. Not to punish you, to protect you from spending your life chasing something that was never going to make you whole. So when you can't move, ask a different question. Not, why am I so lazy? But, what is this protecting me from? What would happen if you finished? What would you have to face? What would you have to admit about yourself? What version of yourself would you have to let go of? Because the inability to act is not emptiness. It's not absence. It's conflict. Two parts of you pulling in opposite directions. One part wants the result. The other part wants to stay safe. One part wants to grow. The other part doesn't want to lose what growth would cost. And you're stuck in the middle, calling it laziness, calling it procrastination, calling it every name except what it actually is. The truth is harder than that. The truth is you're afraid, or you're grieving something you haven't admitted you lost, or you're trying to do something that doesn't actually fit who you are, and some part of you knows it. And none of that is fixable by discipline. None of that is solved by working harder. None of that goes away because you beat yourself up enough. In fact, the self-punishment makes it worse. Because now you're not just avoiding the task, you're avoiding the shame of avoiding the task. You're stuck in a loop. The thing you can't do makes you feel bad. Feeling bad makes it harder to do the thing. Not doing the thing makes you feel worse. And somewhere in there, you decided it was easier to just call yourself lazy. Because lazy is simple. Lazy doesn't ask you to look deeper. But you're here now, which means some part of you is ready to look. You're not lazy. You're just carrying something you haven't named yet. And until you name it, until you look at what the avoidance is actually protecting, you'll keep sitting there, calling yourself lazy, wondering why you can't just move, wondering why everyone else seems to have it figured out and you don't. But now you know. It was never about effort. It was never about discipline. It was about what the effort would cost you, and whether you were ready to pay it.